Hello and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Thank you for watching Westferry Times. Today we're going deep, really deep, into something quite significant. The UK's foreign aid program. It's facing a lot of heat right now, budget cuts, some serious questions about where the money's actually going. And this really touches on, the UK's whole role in the world, which is why it should matter to you. To help us sort of navigate all this, we've got Dr. James Carter with us, a really respected expert in international development. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Great. Okay, let's try and unpack this. Maybe to start, could you give us a bit of an overview? Paint a picture of the UK's foreign aid program. What's it trying to achieve and what made it sort of stand out historically?
Certainly. So the UK's official development assistance, ODA as it's known, it's been a really central part of foreign policy for a long time. The main goals are pretty clear: reduce poverty in developing nations, help them with sustainable development in the long run, and, of course, respond quickly to humanitarian crises. And a really key moment, as you mentioned, historically, was 2015. That's when the commitment to spend 0.7% of gross national income GNI on aid was actually put into law.
Ah, right, that 0.7% figure.
Exactly. That piece of legislation really cemented the UK's position, made it look like a leader in, well, international development funding.
That zero point 0.7 target, that felt like a major statement at the time. But things have shifted quite a bit lately, haven't they?
They really have. Back in February 2025, the government announced a pretty big change. The plan now is to cut that target down to 0.5% of GNI, and that's by 2027.
0.5%. Okay.
And as you can imagine, that announcement has really kicked off a lot of debate. The critics are arguing it, weakens the UK's global standing and could seriously harm some very vulnerable people around the world.
Right. That makes sense. So keeping that backdrop of cuts in mind, let's maybe look at some specifics, some instances that have really put the aid program under the spotlight. I know delivering aid in conflict zones has been tricky.
Yes, that's one of the most difficult areas. A really complex case involves UK aid funds that were sent via UNICEF for programs in Gaza. There were reports suggesting that, the administration of some of this money involved coordination with the Ministry of Social Development there, which is Hamas-controlled.
Hamas-controlled, and Hamas is designated a terrorist organization by the UK, right?
Precisely. So you can see why that immediately raised red flags. Concerns about, could these funds be diverted? Could they be misused? The huge challenge in places like that is that normal oversight, checking where the money goes, is just incredibly hard because of the conflict, the different groups involved.
Yeah, that sounds like a minefield, frankly. Were there other situations where UK aid faced similar kinds of questions?
Yes, definitely. Another one that's cropped up is about a UK investment in an internet service provider in Myanmar called Frontier. Allegations surfaced that the infrastructure Frontier provides, the actual internet network, might potentially be used by the military junta there for surveillance.
Surveillance. Okay, that's worrying.
It is, and what's interesting is the tension there. On one hand, you want people to have internet access, but on the other, what if that same tech is used to clamp down on human rights? The UK decided to continue the funding, arguing it's vital to keep those communication lines open for ordinary people. But it really highlights this ethical tightrope, doesn't it? Supporting something that could be dual use, good for civilians, but maybe also used by the military or state.
Dual use, right. So it's clearly not always straightforward. It's not just aid goes in, problem solved. Okay, let's broaden out again. Beyond these specific tricky cases, what about the overall impact of the budget cuts themselves, the ones we talked about earlier?
Well, the wider effects are likely to be felt across quite a few areas. A really stark example is the funding cuts to programs focused on girls' education.
Ah, yes, I've seen reports on that.
Experts in the field have made really strong cases about, the moral cost, but also the economic cost of cutting back there. We have so much evidence showing how educating girls lifts families out of poverty, improves health, boosts equality. It's a powerful driver for change.
So cutting that has knock-on effects.
Huge knock-on effects. Reducing investment there, it could set back progress for years, decades even. It really impacts overall development in those societies.
And I gather it's not just what's being cut, but also where some of the remaining aid money is going now. That's also causing some debate.
Exactly that. A really significant chunk of the UK's aid budget, the ODA budget, has actually been shifted. It's being used to cover costs inside the UK, specifically for housing refugees who've arrived here.
Okay, housing refugees in the UK using the foreign aid budget.
Yes. Now, supporting refugees is, of course, absolutely essential, a humanitarian duty. Nobody disputes that. But the issue is, When you use the aid budget for that, it means less money is available for those projects overseas, the development work, the poverty reduction programs.
Right. It's money that's not going abroad anymore.
Precisely. So it raises this really critical question. Is this the right balance? Is the UK meeting its domestic needs while still upholding those long-standing global development commitments? It's a tough balancing act.
It certainly sounds like it. So, turning to the government side of things, what's their reasoning? What's the justification for these changes, the cuts and the redirection?
The main argument put forward by the government centers on national security. They argue that, with the world becoming more unstable, more dangerous, they need to boost defense spending.
Okay.
And that reallocating funds from the aid budget towards defense is, well, a necessary step to protect the UK's own security and interests.
So, aid versus defense, essentially.
That's the framing often used, yes. But this view has faced a lot of pushback. Aid charities, international partners, they argue that cutting aid actually undermines security in the long run by not addressing root causes of instability like poverty or lack of education, and it harms the UK's reputation.
Right. And has this been a unified view within the UK government itself, or are there different opinions there too?
Oh, definitely not unified. It's actually quite interesting that several high-profile figures within the government cabinet ministers, MPs, have voiced concerns.
Really? What are they saying?
Their arguments often revolve around this idea of soft power. They worry that cutting aid reduces the UK's influence internationally, the kind of influence you get through cooperation and positive relationships, not through military might.
Soft power, right. Influence through attraction, not force.
Exactly. And they argue that, especially now, when the world needs more cooperation, a strong aid program is actually a really important tool. It helps build alliances, creates goodwill, promotes stability, things that arguably are very much in the UK's own long-term interest too.
So quite a bit of internal debate as well. Okay, looking ahead then, given all this, the cuts, the controversies, the debates, where do you see the UK's foreign aid program heading? What's the likely trajectory?
Well, the current signals seem to point towards aid continuing to be quite closely tied to what the government sees as the UK's direct national interests. Security is likely to remain a very big factor in those decisions.
So more focus on security alignment?
Potentially, yes. However, there's also a growing counter-movement, quite vocal, calling for a rethink. Lots of people are arguing strongly that the focus needs to shift back squarely onto the core mission, tackling global poverty, promoting sustainable development for its own sake. I think at the end of the day, the UK's reputation, its standing as a genuine leader in international aid, it's going to depend on finding that balance, balancing domestic needs and priorities with those wider global responsibilities. It's a difficult path to navigate.
A difficult path indeed. Dr. Carter, this has been incredibly helpful. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and clarifying so many complex points for us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So as we've heard, the UK's foreign aid program is really at a pivotal moment, facing major changes, intense scrutiny, and it really makes you think, doesn't it? How does a nation juggle its own immediate needs, its security concerns, with what it owes to the wider world? What are the long-term consequences for the UK and everyone else when those aid priorities shift? Definitely some food for thought there. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive on Westferry Times. Until next time, goodbye.